Okay, I'm on video. Pops, Christina.
Hi.
I just got here, and I wasn't going to do video, but Christina now, she was out and she just came in and said, "Oh, Preacher John, I had some questions me and my friend Frank wanted to ask." And I said, "Okay, before you ask them," I said, "let me start the video, and that way I'll teach you whatever it is." Now, if Pops, me and Pops, we're going to go see our friend Bear today, but Pops, he's getting treatment for cancer, and today he doesn't feel real good. So we're going to run around a little bit and do. Okay, Christine. Now,
okay.
What did you want to ask me?
It says in the computer, render to the Bible. Okay, it has these crazy things like, let's see, if you get castrated, you can't go back to the church.
Okay, I'll answer that one.
Okay.
As you see, I did not prepare for these questions. Okay, here's a verse. That's not true. If you get castrated, you can't go back to the church. But there's a verse where Jesus said, "If your eye offend thee, pluck it out. If your hand offend thee, cut it off. Because it is better for you to enter into life maimed, or with one hand and one eye, than to go to hell or suffer judgment with two hands and two eyes." Now, that verse is saying, if you have a temptation, your eye offend you, your hand offend you, cut it off. Now, some Christians, there was a man by the name of Origen who lived in the 200s. Okay, that's called the 3rd century. That's 1800 years ago. Origen founded the first Christian school ever. It was a school of philosophy, and Origen became Christian, and it was in a city called Alexandria, Egypt. Now, I know I'm teaching a lot. I'm going to get the question. So Origen took that verse where Jesus said, "If your hand offend thee, cut it off." And you know what Origen did? He castrated himself.
He did?
That way he wouldn't be tempted to be sleeping around with women. Well, there's another verse where Jesus says, these are verses on not so much castration, but where people get this from. There's another verse Jesus said, "Some men are born eunuchs, others are made eunuchs." And then he also said, "To whomever could receive it would receive it." Now, eunuchs were what? Eunuchs were kings in the Old Testament. They had a harem, okay? They had many women. Kings had a lot of wives, a lot of women. A eunuch would be somebody that if I was a king and I had 100 wives or 100 women, and I wanted someone to watch them women when I was gone, who would I hire? Would I hire some gigolo to watch them? No, because he's going to sleep with them all. I would hire somebody called a eunuch, which is somebody that's going to watch over the harem when I'm gone, and I know he's not going to mess with them. That's what a eunuch is. So, in the Bible, you have certain people at certain times either took those verses where they said, "I'm going to castrate myself," or they lived a celibate life, which meant they chose to not have a wife, or they chose to not sleep around. But there's nothing in the Bible that says if you're castrated, you cannot be in the church. There's nothing like that. Why? Frank thought it was.
No, he said that was.
You got a lot of notes there.
Yeah, I know, but that's not all the notes.
Okay.
Okay. He said that if you go into this part in the computer, and it will tell you these things.
Now, there might be churches that, not that I'm aware of. I know the Catholic Church does not teach this, but there might be churches that do say.
Weird religion in San Diego. The real weird religion in San Diego. All the men that went there were being castrated.
Okay, yes, I remember this.
Religion over
Are
there.
they never being castrated?
Listen, I'll give you another verse where they might be getting this idea from. There's a verse in the Bible that says, there's scriptures that talk in the Old Testament about people that are born deformed or have problems. And they were not allowed to serve in the temple or to serve like in a priesthood. And one of them says, if a man has his stones crushed, okay, that means if you have, that's not castration, but it says if your testicles are crushed, you cannot serve God in a certain way.
Well,
Now,
how did they get crushed though?
I'm not even sure. It just kind of says that. Now, some people might also get the idea that if you're castrated because of that verse, that you also can't serve. But none of that would apply to us today as Christians. That would be Old Testament verses. There are some that are hard for us to teach because in the same verses it says if somebody is born as a dwarf or as a midget, they can't serve. But that would not apply to us today.
In 1979, when I started Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a young man who would sit on the back row. He wouldn't talk, and he was homeless and dirty, but he wouldn't talk. He'd just sit there. So he came to AA, and one day I went up to try to talk to him. He pointed to here, but he couldn't talk. Later, I found out I had a little extra room. I said, "Get off the street and come stay in that little place." And he saw a guitar, and he was sure and got to start playing this guitar. He could play, he could play good. And then finally he said something. But what happened, his mom and dad were very serious Pentecostal. And his little brother and him both had said a cuss word. And the daddy cut both of their tongues off. And they were tongue, they didn't have a tongue. Yeah, they didn't have a tongue. Cecil Wynn J. That was his name. And one day I said, "Cecil, what are you going to do with your life?" He said, he could talk. He'd talk to me, but you could barely understand him. And he wanted to tune pianos. It just happened that I knew a blind guy at Whittle Music Company who taught piano tuning. So I took him over there and paid the $300 for him to go to that piano tuning school. And he got his brother down here. But that was because his family was serious Pentecostal. And he would not have anything to do with his family, our Pentecostal people after that, because he couldn't talk. But he finally went to piano tuning school, and he is now, at last I heard from him, he was in New York tuning musical instruments on Broadway. And he finally did get married, and he called me, and he had some work done on his mouth. He said his baby could talk. His little boy, he had a little boy, and his little boy could talk. And so that's what happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. We run into a lot of very strange situations dealing with religion. Even with me sometimes. The way I grew up, I wonder what was wrong. But my great-grandmother, was Caddo Indian and French. And when they came to this country, they were probably Celtics. Adored they were, and she had that. Her husband now was Presbyterian, but she did not go to church. He did, but she had been affected. It's like a stumbling block in front of some people to find Jesus Christ or Christianity. They had like even Charlie. They had abused Charlie so bad when he was a kid. He was in like the Baptist. Even Timothy Baker's son, after his mother and his dad got in trouble, and that little boy couldn't help it. And he said how bad the adults, the Christians treated him. And he went out and got turned into an alcoholic and drug addict. And then he got sober and he runs a halfway house and had to get rid of the stumbling block.
That's Jim. That was Jim. I remember that. Do you know? The first book I wrote many years ago, I actually had it published by Morris Publishing in, I think, Nebraska. But so I did that one as an official book. I sent copies of that book to different. It was called House of Prayer, Den of Thieves. It dealt with money and the prosperity gospel. I sent copies to a lot of famous preachers. But do you know, Jim Baker was the only one who sent me a personal postcard back and thanked me for the book. But Jay Baker, I believe is the boy's name, and he kind of strayed, but then he started a ministry and reaching out to a lot of.
Tampa, Florida.
Okay, Christine, she's got questions,
I'm
so I
just
want to make
because
sure.
I won so bad.
Yes.
Okay, the next question. The next one was, if children don't obey, they get stoned.
Okay, in the Old Testament, if you cursed, but none of this is applies to us today as
No,
Christians.
was it in the Bible?
Yes, that was it.
Okay,
Why?
yes
Frank,
and no.
Frank said it was in the Bible and you didn't believe it.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
yes, it was in there. If you cursed your parents, yes,
Get
you were going to.
stoned?
Yes. Now the verse that Frank, the other one he might have been thinking of when he said, "If you castrate, you can't be in the church." It might have been that verse of the one I quoted.
Oh, come on,
So,
now lose.
but that does not apply to us today. But those are in the Bible. That's in the Bible. So Frank said, "Ask your friend Preacher John and see what he says."
Okay, so now it's 2 down or 1 down. You
Okay.
said yes first. Now you say no.
Well, in the church, what I'm seeing now is Frank is getting these verses from the Old Testament, and that's why he's asking those. But that does not apply to us today. We're in.
no, he just said it was
Christianity.
in the Bible.
Well, it
okay?
is in the Bible.
Uh-huh.
It is in the Bible. Frank
Okay,
is
last place.
Frank is an old friend of Christine. I've not met him, but they grew up together in the Northeast, and they just recently became friends again and talking again. And so it's kind of when they talk about the Bible, I guess she says, "Well, I'm going to ask Preacher John," you know.
What he won, man. There was a couple more, but I forget them. I wrote them down on the other book.
Okay.
I can't remember all of them, but it's crazy things like,
Yeah.
you know, let me go get my...
Those verses, and I could teach on some of that because in the Bible, those verses were very strict, and they were and are in the Old Testament. But the way today we understand those is Jesus showed us grace and mercy. And now some Christians have such a hard problem with those verses. Some believe that the God of the Old Testament was not the true God. Some Christians said that. I don't believe that, but some had a view that there was a man by the name, I'm doing some history, Montanist, and or Marcion, one or the other, but they might have been Marcion, but they had such problems with these verses that they just decided that was not the true God of Jesus, but that God that said these things in the Old Testament, he was the God. It was sort of like Greek philosophy. He was not really God. Of course, Christians believe that that is God. The God of the Old Testament is God. But what you're seeing is God and man without Christ as the mediator, meaning this. You're seeing wrath or judgment and strictness and harshness because the law, which is the Old Testament, had no grace the way we have grace today. And when Jesus died, it says in the New Testament, in the book of Philippians, he is the image of the invisible God. So Jesus came to show us that God, though he is the same God, the Father of the Old Testament, as he is in the New Testament, but because of Christ dying for us, we are no longer under that type of a judgment.
Okay, so it's in the Old Testament,
Yes.
but not in the New
Correct,
Testament.
that's right.
Okay, so that's good to know.
Yes, that's right.
That's good to know.
Christ added,
Let me get this
because
other one.
he talks to he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus added grace and mercy
Yeah.
to the Old Testament. It probably may be the same God, but he just added grace and mercy
Yes.
and forgiveness because we're all born sinners.
Yeah.
Now, in Europe, it's very popular in France and some countries. Doers always, and they say there was a cult before Judaism, and they took one son and they did not circumcise him, but what they did is they rolled the foreskin and put little square precious stones triangles in there.
Yes.
In the foreskin, and it helped them, made them not want to do anything.
Yeah. Pops, let me explain this. Pops, and it's good that he's talking about this. Pops, when he was growing up, realized that he was not normal. He thought it was a sort of like a sexual deformity that he had. And it caused, and so we're talking a little bit about the castration and all this. And Pops has told me this before, and he never understood. This is adults on this side. Well, some people are circumcised, some people are not. But Pop said something that was different, and he thought he was deformed. And the reason he's talking a little bit about the history eventually he would find out that it wasn't that he was deformed, but that more than likely there's certain rite that they would practice where they would not do a circumcision, but they would put things under the foreskin and kind of sew them in. Somebody later on in life told Pops, that's what that defect you thought you had is. But that could affect you because you could think, what's wrong
The
with me?
person that exposed that truth to me was Dr. Doug McLean. He taught at Southern Methodist University, and he found it out. See, I was always ashamed and covered it up. I was ashamed to let any man or anybody know, and because I thought I didn't know it was done when I was a little baby. So Dr. Doug McLean said, "Man, your family, if you was in Europe, you would be an ordinary person, and that they intended you probably be a high priest in that occult."
Yes, that was it. This practice came from Druid type thing.
Mm-hmm. And they're still very strong in Europe.
Yeah.
But and the ones that came here fled for their freedom of religion, and they went in these backwoods. There's still some of them here in the United States. And sometimes they will go to a Presbyterian church or Methodist church as a sort of a cover-up to belong to the community, but they still have them cultures they hang on to. And like even the Catholics, when they got to Mexico, there's still some cultures that's in the Catholic
Correct. There's actually a name called Santeria, and that's a mixture. The Catholic Church, this is in Mexico, the Catholic Church officially rejects the Santeria, but it was a mixture of some of the occult practices with Catholic Christianity. And that just became, I talked about that in the other video, it's like a syncretism, meaning you try to mix Christian. Okay, Christine, you got some more questions?
Okay, it's just one more. And,
Yeah.
something,
Yes.
okay.
Look, Pops, watch. You think I'm making this up. What did you want, Pops?
One cigarette.
See, Pops, I'm going to buy him some cigars.
You don't have any cigarettes?
I've been telling Pops, I've been telling on the videos that you bum, sometimes I got to buy you whole packs.
I
See?
do, but I didn't get any.
Pops, here you go.
He's going to take me to the store to get them.
And I kind of understand this one. He probably
Okay,
gave
go
me
ahead.
good ones this time, but something about if two men are fighting and the woman takes the man's stuff, not her husband's stuff, then I can understand it. She gets her hand chopped off or something?
I don't know that. There is verses on stealing, and it might be something like that, but the two men are fighting, one takes from, I don't know anything kind of that
she
way.
can't take the other
Yeah.
man's stuff, but I can
Well,
understand that stealing.
Yes. No, I'm not familiar with that one. Islam practices that. In Islamic countries, if you're
Doesn't
caught
China
stealing,
too? Yeah.
the hand gets cut off. But in the context of the way you just said that, I'm not real familiar with where I would maybe find that. But there's strict rules on stealing, you
Yeah,
know,
it is.
even in the Old Testament. And but offhand, I can't think of a verse.
They done things now called Prince Albert.
How long?
Prince Albert, they do it. Prince Albert had something that into his privates. And
Yes.
Prince Albert and his little gold piece, they stick, they pierce it just like they do your ear.
I'm going to have to, what will I title this video? The castration
Albert.
video.
And they
Is
were
it in the
popular in
Bible
England.
or not?
Prince
It is.
Albert
This,
was popular in England.
A good thing to talk about on this, though, is some people are born, we have a whole psychology today where a lot of the younger generation are questioning sexual identity more so than you ever had before because it's taught very openly in some of the schools. They say to question it. In cases, Christians have to be real careful. There are cases physically where people are born with both sex organs, okay? There's a name for that. I forget if it's,
Morphodite.
yes,
Morphodite.
or a morphodite or hermaphrodite.
Well, they keep it real quiet, but it happens more.
And when people might have something like that, that could cause a tremendous psychological impact on people. So as Christians, when we deal with issues of homosexuality, things of this nature, we want to make real careful that people that are born with physical deformities, there should never be any ostracize those people, because That's purely a physical thing. And I think that could become a problem. These scriptures I quoted, there's one in the Old Testament that says if a person is a dwarf, a midget, also that's in the same verse I gave Christina, if their stones are crushed, they cannot serve God in a certain way. Of course, all of those verses...
But they can go into a church, though.
Well, yes, you didn't even have churches back then. You had things that were called, you had the temple and you had the tabernacle. But
so it's really not that.
no, I mean, today, if you're a Christian or anybody that had any type of deformity, whether it's castration or anything, no, you're welcome anywhere unless there's some church somewhere that says no, some cult church or something. But any more questions, Christine?
Okay, what he told me is if you go into the computer and is the Bible relevant today? That's what he said, and then
Yeah.
they can pull up some stuff that's crazy
Well,
like that.
yes.
But I think he told me some crazier stuff. This time he
Yeah.
he eased it. I basically won, though, right?
In some, you did.
Most of the time.
All of those verses are in Scripture for the most part, but they're not dealing with church because church is today as Christians after Jesus died and rose again. We are different. We're called grace, so we're not under those strict regulations like that. So Frank would be right in the sense that those verses are in the Bible, but he would be wrong in the sense that they're not applied today. Okay? The church accepts anyone who comes in repentance. Now, if somebody has a physical deformity, that's no fault of their own. If somebody was castrated, that's no fault of their own. I mean, there's nothing to repent for if you had some type of physical thing. Like Pops is sharing, that thing affected him all those years. And Pops told me that story before. But he didn't realize that, so yes, these issues, people that I would hate if I had a friend that was actually a dwarf or a small person that suffered from dwarfism. If they came across that verse that says you can't serve God, which is in the Old Testament verse, I would explain it to them that, look, this has nothing to do with today as a person who wants to go to church or believe in Jesus, but those are hard verses that we have to explain as Christians, and people have to learn those. So
now with me, I could get married, but when I have an activity, I'd always do it in the dark. It was very painful for her. We used to joke about it, built on French tickler, and it was painful. So it did create some...
this is going to turn out to be like a porno video.
It did create some strange feelings between us.
Give me my lighter. Oh, here it is.
It did create a lot of strange feelings between me and Rose, and she didn't understand it either, and I didn't. And I finally, in 1976, I had it surgically removed.
You knew.
After I found out what it was, I just thought I was deformed.
Yes.
And I'd always cover it. When I went in the military, I covered it up where nobody could see. And, but it really just, in the normal relationship with a female.
Always in the dark. Always. And a naked body is ugly, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's ugly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's ugly. Ew, you know what I mean? It's ugly.
Adam and Eve, there's actually scripture talks about when they were created, obviously they didn't have clothing, but then when they sinned, you could almost teach, it says, why did you hide yourselves? Because they had shame and they were naked, and God says, who told you that? So they ate from the tree that they were forbidden to eat from, which is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So you could almost teach a little bit on where guilt came from, where shame came from originally in the original creation.
But it is. It really is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
There's a time and place for everything.
Yes.
And that's not,
Thank God we got rid of that.
I just...
Quit doing that. Some people probably still do it.
And sex is just overrated by men. I think
Yes.
God put too much testosterone in the males.
Testosterone,
Yeah,
some people,
because
yes.
to get
Some people don't want that.
children back. But you know what I mean? It's too much high because it's too many rapes, too many
Well, a lot of my friends that
porno
do,
and all that crap.
a lot of my friends that do math. I've never really done math. I took ephedrins, a whole bunch of ephedrins once, many years ago, which is basically meth. But I never was a meth addict that did meth. But the meth guys will tell me, they say, John, we're on meth, it really raises the sex drive. And so it's interesting because things affect you, whether it's certain drugs or whatever. And yes, that does have effect on society. Rapes and whatever, I'm sure, increase. But that's it.
That's
No
why,
more.
I mean, I know God wanted everybody to produce.
Yes.
And that's what the main thing was, but I think back then he put too much in the man. And you know what I mean?
Some men,
most
don't.
men,
A lot
most
of men,
men,
80% of them.
they just, have to have it. And I understand. I'd say, look, I know, and I know you have a problem. I don't. Sorry. Just get away from me, I understand you have a problem, but you know what I mean? It's just, I don't know, men are just so, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think,
They got more.
I think God just put a little bit too much in a man so that, you didn't really realize how many kids we'd have and, how much corruption it would be after that,
Well, sin,
yeah,
some
rapes
people
and,
thought.
and all this dirty stuff and porno and
Some people taught.
it's just men in general.
Yes.
I'll say 90% of men. Okay, there's a 10%.
I have a friend. He was married to the sweetest person I ever knew.
I'm going to go another
And he
4
had
minutes.
5 children, and he drove a truck. He was a preacher. He was a Pentecostal preacher, but he was a truck driver.
You told me this story.
And then one time he gets this pretty blonde that she worked at a truck stop, and he got her pregnant, and his wife got a letter and got a divorce. He ended up having 2 children by this new wife. Well, he didn't treat that first wife, even his 5 children by that first wife, won't have nothing to do with him today. That's happening now. But he is still remains the most judgmental of other people. He can't see what he was doing.
And Pops, when you told me that, I remember you told me that story. But he stayed as a preacher.
He stayed as a preacher.
Yeah, kept pastoring. Even though
active in the church, the Pentecostal church, and very judgmental about everybody else sinning. But what he did, he can't see that was wrong.
Yeah.
He can run everybody else's inventory, but he can't run it, look at himself. And he left Geneva. She's never remarried. She's had a tough life. She helped to raise the kids. She raised the kids basically by herself. Yeah. And now she's got children that all of them got problems.
Do you want to sing any of your gospel songs, Pops?
Not today.
Not today. Pops was feeling, down today, and he wasn't even going to go out. I called him. I thought he had his treatments today, but I was working on my computer, and then I called him about 10. He said, "Oh, you can come by." But now we're going to go out. We're going to do a few little errands, but I told him, I said, "Pops, I don't sit at my house because I get depressed if I'm at my house. So I got to be out all day, being active, and that helps me to." So I think we're going to end it. I'm not sure the title of this video, but if Pops wanted,
Who's right, Frank or Chris?
Stuff that they won't talk about.
I think
this
I
is
won.
stuff though that they
Yes,
talk about in
correct.
church, and there's a stumbling block with a lot of people. They can't get into Christianity because they have that internal stumbling block.
Yes. Yeah.
And to remove the stumbling block is
Yes.
we have to learn how to read. In modern day, 60% of the babies are born out of wedlock,
Yeah.
and a lot of them do have problems.
Yeah.
And the mother sometimes will love them and hate them, and if she marries, sometimes the husband will be jealous of even the baby,
Yeah.
and that's.
Yes. There's a lot of broken. You met a lot of people, I think, in
I've
the
met a lot of people
in
like
the AA over the years
Yeah,
that
I've met
have
a lot of
all
people out
the.
here on the streets like that.
Yeah.
I met one. She was a sweet girl, and her mother had had wedlock, and then she got married to a man, and when he would go to her mother was an RN working at a hospital, but when she was 11, 12 years old, her stepdaddy was having sex with her.
Yeah.
And
Molested as a kid.
Yeah. And she's now in a wheelchair and had always had emotional problems, and they did claim Christianity. So,
No guys sit with me and him.
Oh, I'll give it to you. She wants to give me $1 for a
That's
cigarette.
fine. It's customary.
I'm gonna buy Pops a pack of cigars today.
Yeah, I got nothing to. I got to go.
No.
No, that's all right. You take it.
I don't want it.
Cigarettes and money.
No, I'm gonna pop Pops and pack his cigars. All right, I think we're gonna end. The next teaching video I'm gonna do a little on the Western literature. Some more. I did Nietzsche on the last video. I'm gonna do Kierkegaard's on Fear and Trembling. It's a book he wrote. I'm gonna teach on that, and I'm gonna teach Genesis 22 and Hebrews 11. I could do it now, but I won't do it now. So read Genesis 22, Hebrews 11. Maybe Google. Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher in the 19th century, and he's considered the father of existentialism. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, so you might want to look that up. I might post this tomorrow. Today is Tuesday. God bless. Hope you like all the discussion today.